This is the Nintendo Switch 2, and this is the original Nintendo Switch. So how do they compare to each other? Well, something that you've probably noticed that even surprised me is the Switch 2's box is smaller than the original Switch's. It's about the same size as the Switch OLED. I think it might even be smaller than the Switch OLED's box, which is really weird for Nintendo because if two people see these on the shelf, the bigger one would usually be the newer and better one. But that's not the case here. Now, the actual consoles look pretty different because the Switch 2 is basically all black except for the two little joysticks. And you can see just how much bigger the Switch 2 is. It's like a whole Joy-Con bigger, like lengthwise, and then the screen is huge. So of course the original Switch uses the old Joy-Con, so you press this button and then they slide off. Honestly, not as satisfying as they are now, which is just you click this little button. Oh, whoops. You click this little button and then they pop off, and then putting them on is so satisfying. Oh. The buttons on both are still clicky. The Switch 2s are slightly bigger though. You can kind of tell. Joysticks are way bigger on the Switch 2 and they feel way better. They're like super smooth and they feel like really premium. The colors of blue and red are actually slightly different between them. The Switch 2s are just kind of lighter, and so you can kind of see that there. And then one of my least favorite parts about the original Switch, the kickstand. It sucks. It's this little flimsy thing that can just pop out, and it only has one adjustment. And that's it. And it doesn't even hold up the Switch very well. With the Switch OLED, they redid that. And then the Switch 2 basically uses the same kickstand, except it's hollow now, unlike the Switch OLED. So you can use it as a handle, look at that. But it's like solid metal, so it's really nice and premium. But the real difference between these two is when you turn them on. You can see just how much bigger the display of the Switch 2 is. This one's like the size of my phone screen. And then the Switch 2 is like the size of a tablet. And that's exactly what I felt like opening this for the first time. It just feels like a tablet instead of a phone. So the screen on the Switch 2 is bigger and it's 1080p now instead of 720 like the old Switch and the Switch OLED. And so looking at this Switch screen now is so tiny after I've gotten to look at the Switch 2 some more. I could never go back. Now, it's not just the screens. Both consoles can also be docked. And honestly, both docks feel exactly the same. The Switch 2 dock is just a little longer and I think slightly heavier. It feels cheaper than I thought it would be. The dock does not feel premium, like really at all. And if you look inside, the way the Switch 2 attaches is like the exact same as the Switch 1. I'm guessing you can probably fit the Switch 2 in the Switch 1 dock. Let's try it. Actually, you can't. This little spot right here on the Switch is different on both of them. So can the Switch 1 go in the Switch 2 dock? No, it doesn't fit. The only major difference between these docks is that the Switch 2 now has a fan inside of it somewhere, while the Switch 1 didn't have any fan. It was just kind of there. And of course, the Switch 2 supports up to 4K through the dock now. And the original Switch only did 1080. And something else that I think will help a lot is you can see that there's these two pillars that go up and they're both solid plastic. So the plastic is on the console's side of where the screen faces. So if you look on my Switch 1, there literally is scratches on my glass screen protector. The screen of the Switch is plastic. So a screen protector was a must-have in my opinion. And when you have plastic rubbing against the screen and it's a plastic screen, that's gonna scratch super easily. And so when I looked at the Switch 2 dock, they only have one pillar and it's at the back. And then there's this little notch down here that I thought was rubber, but after looking at it closer, it's just plastic. So technically your bottom of your screen might get scratched a little. And sadly, the Switch 2 screen still isn't glass on the outside, it's plastic. There's a permanent screen protector on it that's meant to keep the plastic together if it breaks, but that means this could super easily scratch with any metal surface. And so I already bought screen protectors for my Switch 2, I just haven't put them on yet, but these are, I would consider a necessity if you don't want that screen getting broken. So both Switches also have Pro controllers. So the Switch 1 Pro controller box is horizontal like you'd expect a controller box to be, but the Switch 2, I guess to make it different, they made it vertical. So the controller sits vertically in there. But speaking of the controllers, there is some huge improvements. My main issue with the Switch controller, which is why I never really wanted to use it, is because when you move the sticks around the edge, it does not glide. It is rough. It is like rough plastic on rough plastic. And you can see that it creates white plastic dust and it can get really bad. And it's just so rough. It's so bad. It's like the worst sticks I have on any controller. The D-pad on it was also really bad. Like if you click down, sometimes it would accidentally click left or right. So I had to put tape on it to cover like half of each of the sensors so then it wouldn't do it as bad. And that definitely helped. And so the Switch 2 basically fixed all of that. So if I go to settings and test the D-pad on the new controller, You can see that it never misclicks really anymore at all. It's so nice. The D-pad still isn't my favorite D-pad, but the fact that it doesn't misclick makes it a lot more playable. And then by far the best part of this controller are the sticks, and it's the whole reason I bought it. It was worth $85 for me just to have a Nintendo controller with good sticks. It's really hard to explain, but the sticks are super smooth around the edges, but it's got like just enough tension that it doesn't feel cheap. It's hard to explain until you actually feel it, but it is such an improvement over the Switch 1. The sticks on my Switch 2 controller even feel better than my Xbox Elite Series 2 controller, which this costs like double the price. And so I'm amazed at what Nintendo did here and made it so much better. And of course, there's also back buttons now, which I don't know if I'll ever use, but I do like how they're like smooth with the controller instead of poking out, so you don't have to click them if you don't want to. And then the one other weird thing about the controller is the gray. For some reason the top is gray, the joysticks are gray, and I have no idea why. Nothing about the Switch 2 has gray on it except the controller. I think if anything they should have made one of the joysticks blue and one of them red highlights, just like how the Switch Joy-Cons are. So I don't know where gray came from. And they actually moved your player icon from the bottom of the controller to the top, which I kind of like the bottom more because I'm just used to checking that, and I'm not used to checking the top, but it's more comfortable for my hands to check the top than it is the bottom. My muscle memory just looks at the bottom. When you go to plug the controllers in at the top though, you usually miss a little until you finally like make it in. And so because of that, my Switch controller has so many scratches because there's a shiny plastic right here, so it is scratched so much. So I really like what they did with the Switch 2 controller and made that all matte, so you won't be able to see those scratches near as much. Now, if we get the Joy-Cons and look a little closer, you can see that they're still like basically the same thickness, but the Switch 2 ones are way taller. And that tallness is actually really nice in my hands. I have bigger hands, so it's kind of nice. The only thing that still bothers me is how thin it is. It's really thin for my hands, and you can see my whole hand wraps around it still. If there was just a little grip at the back, it might be nice. But having it thin is kind of nice too, so I don't know. They would have to make compromises either way. But by far, one of my favorite features of the Switch 2 is this. I can turn the Joy-Con sideways. Okay, maybe I have to go home first. I can turn the Joy-Con sideways, and then there is a mouse. And so certain games support these, not very many actually do at launch. The only one I could find was Hogwarts Legacy that supports it, but it works just like a mouse. You can click and drag and stuff, and it's super nice. This opens up so many possibilities. And the one I'm really hoping is for them to add Wii games to Switch Online, because now that we have a mouse controls, we can recreate the Wii remote cursor. And the other thing I like about the Switch 2 Joy-Cons is that when you're holding them sideways, you have a little bit more room for your hands, so they're not as uncomfortable. Plus, SO and SR are huge at the top without having to have the strap like you had to have on the Switch 1, because these things are tiny and they're super hard to get to. Yeah, actually using the Switch 1 controller like this for a second, I really appreciate how long the Switch 2 controllers are. It's definitely a lot more comfortable. And yes, you can attach the Joy-Cons whichever direction you want on the Switch 2 and they still work. Like you can just go completely backwards if you want and they still work. And the nice part about the Switch 2 is if you don't want to buy the new controller and stuff, you don't have to. The old controller still works just fine, but I wanted a controller with smooth sticks, so I wanted to upgrade. One other thing to mention about the Switch 2 controllers is that when you find them, they now beep. So I'm guessing there's some sort of speaker inside of here that does that, which that's cool because that brings up a lot of possibilities for future games. And then the Joy-Cons have the same thing. So I wonder if they can start making games like the Wii again and have the controller make noises. So yeah, that's the general differences between the original Switch and the Switch 2. The Switch 2 definitely has a lot more performance than the Switch 1. It runs hotter too, and it has worse battery life from what I've tested. But overall, it's a really big improvement. Subscribe if you want to see more content on the Switch 2. No! My microphone clamp broke off. I can't clip it on.